I haven't forgotten you.
Let's talk about God of War.
The city will be your grave.
Hello everyone, it's your boy CreamyC here with another weekly rundown. Yeah, I'm not married to that intro. God of War. When the idea of reviewing one of the most well-known and praised PlayStation 2 games crossed my mind, I immediately dismissed it as lunacy. What can I say about God of War that hasn't already been said by much more qualified reviewers? Not much. Why? Well, I'm about to say something earth-shattering here, so you might want to clench your sphincters for this one. God of War is a fantastic game. I know, if I were living under a rock since 2005, I'd be swimming in a pool of my own ass gravy right about now, due to the sheer shock of this news causing me to expel all of my body fluids at once. All sarcasm aside, most people who know what God of War is know that it's amazing, either by playing the game itself or one of the 17.5 gorillion clones that it spawned in the mid-2000s to early 2010s. Some of these clones were actually great games in their own right, and others, not so much. At first I thought this review would be one of my usual 8 to 10 minute affairs, but this one turned into something much longer and more detailed, despite my best efforts to make it pithy. I guess if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a great game is worth 3,772 words, give or take. Despite that, I'm still going to use my standard reviewing format to take on this incredibly rich and detailed game one bite at a time. With that being said, let's find out what made God of War so good and why so many studios wanted to copy it for about a decade after its release. God of War's visuals are so good, I need to break out the thesaurus so I don't use the same word 50 times when describing them. It's one of the best looking games on the PlayStation 2. It also looks great when stacked up next to a lot of PlayStation 3 games, which I only bring up because I'm playing the far superior PS3 version of God of War in the HD collection featuring God of War 1 and 2. This nifty Blu-ray houses both games with better resolution so you can see the larger-than-life imagery in full 720p with no meaningful changes to gameplay. 720p does not sound like a lot, but it is a hell of a lot more p than 480p. That's one of the best parts about this game. Everything is just breathtaking and varied. It's huge and makes you feel like you're this tiny being that is affecting this cosmic battle between unfathomably powerful entities across the entire country and in multiple dimensions. It's amazing how many different gigantic locations Santa Monica Studios managed to squeeze into this game, and they all look unique and epic. Unless, of course, two stray pieces of cloth are covering the chaotic battlefield overlooked by the formerly utopian streets of Athens. That brings me to my next topic regarding the presentation, the camera angles. The camera angles in God of War are a lot less shit than the camera angles in any other given PS2 game. Notice I said they're not necessarily good across the board, just less shit. Here's the thing. God of War uses fixed camera angles. Like the Blade of Artemis, this is a double-edged sword. You don't have to worry about a dynamic camera that follows you around and has a seizure when something more intense than a gentlemanly spar between two lifelong fellows occurs, but there are moments when crucial pieces of information are just out of reach because the camera doesn't show them. This can either result in objects blocking out in-engine cinematics that aren't necessarily part of a cutscene, or objects blocking out areas within the arena. The camera also doesn't do a whole lot of moving around when you're in a certain area. This is especially bad when you're in a very challenging platforming section and the camera is faced in the completely opposite direction in which you're headed. This is not a fair challenge. This is just blocking out information that the player needs to continue the game. However, when the developers take a risk with the fixed camera angles and it pans out, it really pans out. Here's a montage with epic God of War music in the background because words are hard. Animations talk goes here. Shit. This was originally supposed to be a note to self, but I forgot to erase it before I finished writing the script, so I guess it's going into the video. The animations are extremely fluid, which is vital for a hack and slash game. Everything flows together really well and is pleasing to the eyes without being a blurry mess. My favorite animations in God of War involve Kratos struggling to open things. These chests must be sealed with flex tape, because I've seen Kratos put just as much effort into lifting these giant slabs of concrete that are like 10 times his size. We also can't talk about animations without talking about the gore. I'm going to hold off on going into detail on these because it's much more of a gameplay feature, but just look at the sheer level of detail they managed to put into Kratos ripping monsters apart. For a PlayStation 2 game, this is almost unheard of, and they even capitalize on it in God of War 2 and 3. The voice acting is top-notch. There is, of course, Kratos' emotional dialogue that is voiced by voice actor Terrence C. Carson.
I am not the same man you found that day. The monster you've created has returned to kill you. Do you see, God of War? You took them once, but you'll never have them again.
He brings Kratos' surprisingly dynamic range to life, with lines shouted in pure anger accompanying lines shouted in a relatively subdued and defeated anger, or lines shouted out in a more determined anger. What can I say? The man really knows his way around the different genres of anger. That's not to say there aren't any other great voice actors in this game.
Kronos, the last of the mighty titans, emerged from the desert sands. On his back, Pandora's temple awaited.
May the gods grant you strength to conquer the perils that lay before you. Good luck, Spartan.
The soundtrack is quite excellent, as it is a glorious orchestral arrangement of blaring horns and bombastic drums. This is especially evident in the battle scenes of Athens, while the soundtrack becomes more ambient in the later levels of Pandora's Temple and the Underworld. The soundtracks fit the game perfectly, and either hype the player up or lull them into a more pensive mood to solve the puzzles that the labyrinth offers. There's one last thing about the presentation that I'd also like to bring up. Titties. Yes, lots of girl breasts. Heterosexual males and homosexual females rejoice. Now that we've gotten the obligatory mammary references out of the way, let's take a look at the story. I don't want to give away too many major spoilers, but there will be some minor spoilers here that you probably will already know if you know anything about the series. These spoilers won't necessarily ruin your experience of this game's story, as the real meat of God of War's story doesn't come until the second and third games. God of War is, first and foremost, about Kratos, who is the love child of Quan Chi from Mortal Kombat and Frank Costanza from Seinfeld.
I got a lot of problems with you people. Now, you're gonna hear about it.
Our angry Greek friend must ascend to great powers in order to kill the titular God of War Ares. Though this is Kratos' goal throughout the journey, I would say that the main focus here is about Kratos' journey of wrongdoing and redemption being drip-fed to us in a compelling way throughout the game. You're here to learn about who Kratos is as a character and how he's grown not only throughout the game, but also in his life events that preceded his quest to slay Ares. Kratos is an incredible character. In most PlayStation 2 or Xbox hack-and-slash games, the protagonist can be divided up into two categories. The strong and relatively quiet badass, like Ryu Hayabusa from Ninja Gaiden, or the wisecracking joker, like Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Kratos fits into neither category. Kratos is one of the most human characters in the hack-and-slash genre, which is funny because this game is about powering up to murder a literal god. A cursory look at his actions throughout this game's cutscenes would lead one to believe that he is simply a ball of unbridled rage that leaves nothing but a trail of destruction in his wake. But I believe that this is a wholly inaccurate look at his characterization. He's actually very complex when you sit down and think about his past and how it shaped the kind of person he is in the meat and potatoes of God of War's story. I may be completely wrong here, but I think Kratos is actually a far more noble character than people give him credit for. Okay, noble might be a strong word here, but you'll see what I'm getting at in a second. In the beginning, Kratos may seem like a heartless monster, but he has his reasons for doing everything that he does, no matter how dickish it may seem. Take this scene that many individuals in the mainstream gaming media commonly use to further their anti-Kratos agenda by making him look like a violent douche. Kratos grabs this captain here, and the captain thanks the gods that Kratos came back for him. And then Kratos says,
I didn't come back for you.
Now, out of context, this may seem like a real dick move, but when you consider the events of the previous scenes, you get a clearer picture of why the world really isn't worse off now that the captain is Hydra shit. You see, the captain is a really greasy figure. First of all, he tried running away while his men were fighting the Hydra. Cowardice is not exactly a virtue, especially in the eyes of a Spartan like Kratos. Second, he locked all of the women on the ship in his room, effectively leaving them to be killed by monsters, which is why Kratos grabbed the key from the captain's neck before throwing him down into the belly of the dead Hydra. Kratos sees this man's cowardice and raises him the death of a coward. It might sound cruel, and it really is, but keep in mind that this is a version of ancient Greece in which giant monsters and combative gods are the norm. Kratos rarely kills innocent people outside of regular gameplay unless they're acting cowardly and actively getting in his way. This shows that he has grown significantly since his days of wanton slaughter as a Spartan general who was gifted immense power by Ares, and genuinely wants his sins to be forgiven because his conscience is gnawing at him for the acts of great evil that he committed. Of course, this is God of War 1 Kratos. God of War 2 Kratos is a completely different beast. In a sense, I could say that Kratos is not only angry, but damaged. No, not that kind of damaged. Get that shit out of here. You can tell that he performs some of these brutal actions, such as committing a human sacrifice, with a heavy heart. He doesn't want to do a lot of these things, but he feels that he has to, or else his journey would be in vain. In that context, I would even go so far as to say that the cruel manner in which he performs some of these actions is actually a front to hide just how broken he is. The quality of the story isn't limited to Kratos' characterization either. The tale is structured in such a way that you want to keep playing to not only see what happens next, but also uncover the mystery of Kratos' past and future that the game dangles over you like a carrot on a stick. The first few seconds of the game are a great example of this. You're immediately greeted with Kratos saying that the gods of Olympus have abandoned him, and plunging to what seems to be his ultimate demise. Obviously, this is not his ultimate demise because God of War 2 through 4 exist, but still, this is genius because you immediately have several questions that you hope to see answered. Who is this guy? Why does he want to kill himself? Why is he saying that the gods have abandoned him? Why is he white? Like, really white?
Oh my god, Karen, you can't just ask people why they're white.
You'll slowly receive answers to these questions, as the game never bludgeons you with exposition, but still tells you all you need to know while opening up and solving new mysteries along the way. The way the developers chose to express the lore that was not necessarily within the scope of the immediate events of the game or Kratos' life is also simple yet effective. Unlike other games that make you read long-ass books to learn about the overarching lore of the world, God of War takes a different approach. Take Pandora's Temple, for instance, a place where you will spend most of your time in the game. The tale of the temple's construction is told through effective methods and very few words. The temple was constructed by an architect by the name of Pathos Verdus III, who slowly went insane over the course of its construction. His spiral into madness is documented through these short and sweet logbooks that don't drown you in text, and the design of the temple itself. You see, near the entrance of the temple, the traps are relatively easy to navigate, and the journals are mostly in praise of the gods and show Pathos' excitement to create this temple in their honor. However, the traps slowly get more and more nefarious, and the logbooks show him losing faith in the gods, because he is required to create these machines for killing explorers, who should not be there in the first place because it took Kratos himself, who is a literal demigod, 3 days to climb up the face of the giants. But that's neither here nor there. This eventually culminates into doors that can only be opened using decapitated human skulls, an area that requires human sacrifice to open, and Tetris block puzzles that are supposed to illustrate the fragmentation of his soul. I'd make a joke here about this guy having more edge than a pizza cutter, but let me repeat something here. This guy made doors that could only be opened with human skulls. He's allowed to be edgy. That's enough about the story. Now, how does the gameplay hold up? Well, it holds up fine, but luckily there's more than enough jank in it for me to bitch about. A lot of people like to rag on the God of War series, at least the first 3 games, for its simplistic combat system, but I revel in its simplicity. God of War is a game about going to the roots of the third-person hack-and-slash genre and perfecting them, instead of adding convoluted mechanics that have the potential to adulterate the gameplay experience. The main controls are as follows. You have square for a light attack, triangle for a heavy attack, left trigger to block, and the right stick to dodge. There are several combos that you can unlock and play, and those are very fun to use, but the heart of the game is in pressing these 2 buttons quite a bit. It's simple, yet incredibly fun. More complexity is added later on in the form of another weapon, which is a high damage sword called the Blade of Artemis, magic that Kratos can use in order to more quickly dispatch foes, Rage of the Gods mode, which makes Kratos extremely powerful, and magnifies melee attacks by quite a bit, and takedown animations that may or may not have quicktime events, depending on their complexity. More on those in a minute. The melee attacks are standard fare. As stated before, you have your light attack to deal a little damage, and your heavy attack to deal a lot of damage, and your combos to stun lock your enemies properly. Overall, this is a smooth combat experience, but I actually have a lot of complaints regarding both the combat and the gameplay. Let's start the roast. For starters, the dodging mechanics suck. Dodging is controlled by the right stick, which shouldn't be the case because as we've established in the Mark of Cree video, the right stick and camera control should enjoy a happy marriage with one another. You also choose the direction in which you dodge using the right stick, but the analog stick control in this game is really finicky, so you end up rolling where you don't want to roll. There's also this really frustrating delay which makes dodging feel really awkward and a lot less viable than in other games made after it, which instead have a dedicated dodge button that rolls with the left stick and responds immediately to the player's input. The blocking works well enough, but it has its own problems. While the blocking blocks most of the attacks, it can feel random when it doesn't work. The blocking and dodging both share a frustrating mechanic in which combos cannot be cancelled when you want to block or dodge. Once you start a combo, you're locked in that animation and are helpless to be hit by any enemies that decide your combo is an inconvenience to their way of life. Dropping everything and stopping all momentum in order to block makes the combat feel far more sluggish than in other hack and slash games, and even other God of War games. The other problem I have is with the enemies themselves. Many of them are extremely bullet spongy, even against weapons such as the fully upgraded Blade of Artemis. Actually, wait a second, bullet spongy is the wrong term here because they didn't have bullets in ancient Greece. Let's call them pain sponges. That's better, but it sounds a little kinkier than I had anticipated. I understand a few enemy types being pain sponges, but when it takes forever to kill regular enemies, I just get frustrated. This really isn't helped by the constant spawning, especially in later levels when enemies are always spawning into the arena. It just makes you feel like you aren't making headway in a fight until it's over. I get that this is partly because of technical limitations, but there are some other parts where it's just ridiculous. Take this conveyor belt, where they summoned an assload of harpies. How many is an assload, you may ask? Well, I was killing harpies for such a long time that I thought they were just infinitely spawning and I was supposed to seal one of their entrances that I couldn't see. That was not the case. There was just a mind-boggling swarm of harpies. I don't have a good segue for this, but fuck QuickTime events too. Some of them are fine, like when you grab one of these enemies here, and you either have the option to press square in order to throw them across the arena, circle to do this, and triangle to rip them in half and make this incredibly satisfying popping sound. I'm pretty sure that's the sound of their spines ripping in half. It's especially satisfying when you do it to these shithead archers. Anyway, fuck most of the other QuickTime events. I know this isn't the first game to use QuickTime events, but it sure as hell popularized these absolute crimes against gaming. Am I being a little melodramatic in calling them crimes against gaming? No, and the QuickTime events in this game are especially ass. You have these button prompts that require lightning-fast reflexes to satisfy, and you have these analog stick twists that sometimes just straight up decide not to work if the game realizes it hates you. Also, the last thing I need is to defeat a boss or very large enemy and stare at the center of the screen while something badass is happening, because I can't miss the button prompts that finally lets me kill the damn thing. That's enough running the combat through a flogger. Now it's time to shit on the level design. The level design starts off great, with cleverly hidden secrets and equally clever puzzles. In Athens and the early stages of Pandora's Temple, everything feels interconnected in a way that makes the separate stages have a more logical flow, while still feeling varied and interesting. I also never felt lost in these levels, which is difficult to do because this type of design has the potential to be labyrinthine in nature. I guess a labyrinth would be appropriate because we're in ancient Greece and all that, but it doesn't lend itself well to level design. Then once you get through the Cliffs of Madness, everything feels a lot more linear with fewer secrets scattered about. After the aforementioned Cliffs of Madness, there are varied locales, but not everything feels interconnected until you return to Athens for the final showdown against Ares, and smack the low-level enemies in that area. The quality of the non-combat challenges also takes a nosedive with the level layouts towards the end of the game as well. Let's engage in a little case study here. Towards the beginning of the game, you have this challenge in which you have to hunt down 3 sirens in order to forge a path through the desert. How do you accomplish this? By listening to their singing get progressively louder the closer you get. It's simple, but it requires attention to a detail that would otherwise be taken for granted. Now here's an example of a late game challenge, the rotating spike tower. AKA, the reason I wanted to travel back in time and strangle the project lead of this game to death with his own umbilical cord. This is simply a rotating tower of spikes that knock you all the way back down if you're caught within the same zip code as them. It can pretty much be won by hanging out near the side and waiting for an opening, but it's still frustrating even with the exploit because there are many dead ends that you encounter in the middle of the rotating platform. The dead ends actually make you think you could fit through them, but you cannot. This isn't a clever or fun challenge, it's just the same overly difficult bullshit that the developers force you to endure towards the end of the game to make it feel more oppressive. Now for a major tone shift. To conclude, God of War deserves the high praise that it got. It's an excellent game that has its fair share of flaws while still returning to the roots of the hack and slash genre, and providing a simple yet enjoyable gameplay experience. If you haven't tried this series out, I'd recommend picking up the entire thing for the PlayStation 3. I haven't played the new one for the PlayStation 4, but I heard great things about it, so I guess pick that one up too if you want to see what Kratos was up to after the events of God of War 3. That's all, and thanks for sticking it all the way through this extremely long analysis of why God of War is so great. Creamos, out.